What's going on, good folks? Well, y'all know what I really say. And what's happening, blues people. And I'm quite excited to sit down with my good brother this afternoon, the African American folklorist for the month of July. Brother Benjamin Hunter, we're going to honor today. He's a visionary whose music, cultural leadership, and deep sense of community place him at the heart of contemporary folklore and heritage work in the Pacific Northwest. And I really wanted to spotlight and emphasize Pacific Northwest, right? Because from Seattle, Portland, that area, and it's bigger than that, right? You would say, well, there's a stereotype that there's not a lot of black and brown folk, but there is. I learned this, right? And there's a whole bunch of stuff going over there. Very cultural, very cultural. Brother Benjamin Hunter is the artistic director of Northwest Folklife, where he shapes one of the nation's largest community-powered celebrations of cultural tradition. A classically trained violinist, equally rooted in blues, jazz, and folk traditions, Ben is an award-winning composer, educator, and cultural organizer whose work bridges art, policy, and people. Policy is another term that I like to emphasize in this work because advocacy, administration, and that kind of area a lot of times dictates if any organizations or cultural leaders or communities can get any kind of resources, not just financial, right? As a musician, he is best known for his American Roots duo with Joe Siemens. Now, I don't know if he's best known for that, but I know both these two brothers, and I got a lot of love for Joe and his peoples too. They rock hard, which took first place, at the 2016 International Blues Challenge. As a composer, he brought music to the powerful dance work Black Boys. And as a public voice, he continues to lecture, teach, and advocate for the importance of cultural equity and future liberation, right? And we're going to talk about these things today. I got some more. Yeah, you know, I'm gonna keep going, Ben. I see you over there. I got more. But more than titles or scholarships or accolades, Ben is a community-based folklorist in motion. Through projects like Community Arts Create and Black and Tan Hall, he preserves and reimagines what it means to be in communion through tradition, sound, and story. Now we get into it. This is blues ecology, folks. His music spans centuries, but his mission is timeless: to create space, real and imagined, for people to belong, build, and be heard. So today we welcome Brother Benjamin Hunter, not just as a musician, but as a modern griot, a cultural strategist, a vital voice in the story of Black folkways, and the blues. You know, I keep saying that I need to get an applause sign. I got to set my situation up because there's no way we can go from that without an applause. What's happening, good brother?
It's good to be here. Thank you so much, Brother Lamont. I appreciate you.
Oh man, you're doing the work, man, and we appreciate it. And we had a we had several conversations, but a brief conversation prior to going on air, which prompted me to want to ask you this first.
Yeah.
So with all the work that you do in the space that you're in, how do you define tradition?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's well, first off, thank you for having me. I really value the work that you're doing to bring folklore to the masses in a way that I think has been, I guess forgotten in a sense, just because of the times that we're in, and I think I say that in the context of this question because even my role as artistic director for Northwest Folklife, one of the largest, longest running folk festivals in the country, there's still this, I'm gonna call it a stigma.
Okay.
There's still this stigma around what folk is, right? What tradition is. And it for a long time, I think it's changing, but for a long time, it was kind of time capsuled into anything that was old or historic or legacied or something before, right? Leaving out the present and leaving out the future. So such as to say, like, we're the roots of the tree are this thing that we don't see, and it's old, but actually, they're still alive, right? The roots are vital to the growth of the tree, to the growth of the leaves, to the new birth of seeds and acorns and fruits and whatever, right? And so when I think about tradition, and when I think about the definition of tradition, I'm constantly trying to take it out of this kind of like static framework that existed, right? And make sure that people recognize that folk is a living tradition, and the only way, and I truly believe this, the only way for it to continue living is if we are feeding it, and feeding it means not just the same the same old stuff, right? But allowing it to grow and change and progress and evolve. Our festival, I'll just say, I often enough, I'll get emails or texts or phone calls or people coming up to me, and they'll say, hey, the festival's kind of changing. It's not what it was in 1972. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. Thank you.
Right, right.
I appreciate that you're noticing that, because, in Seattle, especially in Seattle, we think about punk and rock and even jazz. It used to be, Seattle used to be the New Orleans of the West Coast. It's
Right.
always been this city that this region that has been inventive and trying to push boundaries and try new things. And if you put all of that stuff into the same context, right, what I think about when I think about tradition is feeding a process, feeding
Hmm.
a timeline that is contiguous, and that if I want these young people to understand the value of a festival like Folklife, it means that I have to not only show them the old stuff, but I also have to give them a place to demonstrate their new stuff. And you know, often enough, most of the time, that new stuff is guided by the old stuff in one form, fashion, or another. And my goal is to help people see that through line, help people see how you connect the dots from this thing that comes from back here, and where this person is taking it, moving forward over there. And so when I think of tradition, I really try and put it in the context of a living thing, of a moving thing, of a vibrating thing, of an active thing, not some folk tale that only exists in the past.
Right, right. And I get that, because I always take notes or words, but I didn't really have to take notes here because you were using specific words, and all these words meant living and breathing currently,
Mhm.
right? Which leads to the future. So it kind of reminds me of this idea of what some people call Afrofuturism, right?
Mhm.
Um, it, I did some work on speaking to folks on the plantation, and the idea of this a lot of black spaces. Well, I mean, many cultural spaces, but for the sake of what we're doing here, many our black spaces are multi-dimensional, right?
Mhm.
Um, but you make it very clear: grow, evolve, conserve, feeding. feeding constitutes living. I really dig that. And also, because that's one of the issues that I have as someone who enjoys as audience and is a practitioner as a performer with acoustic blues. It is really presented, it's doing better now because you have cats like John Tavius, right? Yourself and Joe and different people that are kind of taking it across, but a lot of us are still presented as a niche or a novelty.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I kind of, it
Yeah.
sounds like you are kind of rejecting that notion. Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I definitely reject. I reject so many things. You know, I mean, again, it's like, I mean, there's everything is a dichotomy, right? Because, you know, while there are young cats, and I think I could say that because I'm not old, you know, but I'm 40, but you got cats like John Tavius who are young and have this deep understanding of this blues tradition, this Black tradition, and you know it if I guess if you were gonna kind of listen to his music, I'll use him as a continued example, but also like Andrew Ali or
Yeah.
like there's plenty of cats
And kittens.
and kittens. Yeah, there's plenty. Yeah, exactly. You know, they have a firm understanding of where this is coming from and their place in it. And they also recognize deeply that that this music isn't it isn't just this thing that you like, you put the record on and you're like, oh man, Charlie Patton, man, he really hits those strings, right? Like, yeah, there is that, and there's also like, well, maybe what he was talking about or singing about or describing doesn't exist in that same exact way. But let me bring it to my context, because I grew up with this music. I grew up with these sounds. You know, it's like, you know, for anybody else that's listening to this from from a contemporary perspective, like you think of like a person like Snoop Dogg. You know what I mean? Like that dude grew up listening to records, you know, from the 60s and 70s with his parents, you know, in the living room. And then you listen to his music, right? And like so many of those samples are coming from this music that he grew up with, that is very much a part of him. But then his lyrics obviously are talking about a very contemporary and very present perspective. And I think that's where the problem lies, because so often the audiences that come to these shows, right, particularly if you're out of the South, are older and whiter, and they are looking for, I don't know, I don't want to generalize, but in a lot of contexts they are looking for that novelty, that ancient, right?
Right.
And I think that there is this really exciting movement, you know, where people are trying to put it into a more modern context. And you know, that's certainly how Joe and I approach this music, is it's like, hey, you know, any of this music that we're talking about right now might have been written in 1937, but if you listen close enough to the words, like you could take all those verses and put them in this current context right now, and they still are relevant. And even for somebody that is, you know, firmly rooted in like the older styles, you know, gosh, man, this happens, man. This happens.
It happens to me too.
You know, oh man, you know, brother, the banjo, guitar, violin.
Right. We could talk about Elijah Cox. We could talk about Henry Thomas.
I'm modern dude. He just came out with an album. Why can't I think of his name right now?
Oh, you talk about Jerome Paxson?
Ron Paxton. God dang it, man. Even his new album, right?
Yeah, I have.
That's all original tunes. That's on Smithsonian Folkways, right? Yeah, right. See, even that album, right? Like it's rooted in this old stuff, but
Yeah,
he's a person that doesn't even want to play original new work stuff, right?
right.
He came out with an album of new stuff and brought this new flavor to it, and that's exciting to me. You know, whether it's blues or foho or Vietnamese, like Korean gayagum. I don't care what it is. Like there are people out there, and it's really exciting for me to see these young people that are taking these traditions that they grew up with, that they have a footing in, and they're putting it into a modern context. And I've started to see that happen more and more over the last 10 years, and that's really exciting.
It is, and you really evoked a question that I've been discussing with a lot of folks behind the scene. I've spoken with Marquise Knox, Andy Cohen, Candace Ivory, and you really given me an opportunity to bring this public. When speaking about someone like Jerron Paxson, who doesn't really want to write and perform original song. So my question, in alignment with our discussion of what is tradition or traditional, I'm adding the AL to it.
Yep.
Is it tradition and or traditional if it's a new song? Does it have to be like a public domain? Can I be doing the music of tradition? Because some people think no, because if it's new or original, then it's not a tradition. It's not of the folk.
Yeah, no, I reject that also. I reject that also because here and this is another thing of nuance or this binary, right? Like, and this is almost a strictly an American problem,
Right.
although I don't want, I think the American culture is definitely spreading throughout the world, but there's a difference between art and entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that I don't want to deny. I want to try not. I do it all the time, but I try very hard not to deny an artist's authenticity in the creation of their music or their art or their or whatever their story, however they're choosing to express it. But I do just from what I witness, I do think that there are plenty of creative people out there that are making stuff to be entertainment versus making something that can be entertainment, but that is also expressing a piece of their soul and their identity. And that is traditional.
Mm-hmm.
Because traditional is looking at your environment, listening, smelling, feeling, participating, engaging in your environment, and somehow expressing that through some form, whether that's music, whether that's basket weaving, whether that's art, whether that's storytelling. You're taking the context with which you're in, and you're putting that into some sort of creative format, and that to me is as old as time.
Mm-hmm.
There's this beautiful I can't remember the name of the folklorist that did this. I should commit it to memory so that I can talk about this and give this guy his flowers. But I found him sometime over the pandemic, maybe even before, and he had this blog where he was taking all these tapes that he had collected over the years of his life, traveling around the world.
Mm-hmm.
Obscure tapes, obscure recordings, stuff that you don't find at CD Baby or whatever,
Right.
or whatever you would have found, by stuff that either he recorded or stuff that he found. And one of the tapes that he had was this tape from the Amazon, and the first track was a track of just the ambient noise of the forest, the birds, the rivers, the wind through the trees, the whatever you hear, the monkeys, and it actually is very rhythmic, right? There's a natural flow to this soundscape that you're hearing, and it was like 12 minutes long, 15 minutes long. And then the next track is a recording of the indigenous folks playing music that sounded not too dissimilar from the recording of just the ambient sounds of the forest, right? And what that does is underscore the point that I just made, right? The point of
Right.
folklore, folk whatever, in whatever medium you are doing that is to reflect and to reflect your ecosystem, to reflect your
Right.
environment
Yeah.
in whatever way that comes to you. And I think if you are doing that truly and authentically, then that is as traditional as it gets. I think where it gets a little gray and a little muddy is if you're trying to if you are intentionally, like so much pop music out there, you're
Right.
saying, oh well, I know that I can play this 6-2-5-1 chord progression or whatever this chord progression is going to be, and that's the metric. You know, like there was I
Right.
listened to a whole podcast on how people create pop tunes, and it has to have like certain components so that listeners stay engaged. You know
Right.
what I mean? Like you gotta
Yeah.
have a special thing so that they don't lose interest 20 seconds into the song.
Right.
Like
Right.
that's
That's very corporate. You know, all right, we're going to jump around a bit because I could stay on this conversation with you for a long time. But what I would like to ask you, it's a part A, part B kind of.
Mhm.
Uh, how did you get here? And was folklore ever in your vision? You know, how did we get here?
Yeah. You know, I'll try and tell this as abridged as possible because I tend to weave and wind like a river. Um,
That's in itself is a song right there.
I was born in Lesotho in a country in southern Africa. I that's important to me as a framework because Lesotho was kind of this sanctuary country. It's inside of South Africa. I was born in 1985, so this is at the height and towards the decline of apartheid, right? The most egregious elements of where the decline creates the conditions for the most egregiousness of it because they know their time's up. So I grew up knowing, and I only lived there for a year, but I grew up knowing and listening to the stories of my mom, who had friends in the ANC and was involved, of people getting killed and murdered, disappeared. And so I grew up putting that into further context. I grew up listening to the Eyes on the Prize special on PBS, like when I was a little boy, because my mom was watching. So I put all those things into the context of who I am and what is important to me and what guides my principles. When I was 5, I started playing the violin, and I bless my mom, but her she loves classical music, so I was raised as a classical musician. And that was the direction that she knew how to get me trained in the instrument. And I think at one point I think she asked me, do you want to go to Mark O'Connor's fiddle camp? And I said, nah. I don't know. I don't know. In hindsight, that would have offered me a different direction. But I'm glad with the path that I chose. But the other fundamental thing that my mom gave me was the spirit of travel. Um,
Mhm.
and the thing that one of the things that she valued the most was traveling and seeing the world. And so I think that really is one of the fundamental pillars of me wanting to engage in this work in the way that I do, because my whole perspective on life and how I move through the world is guided by the things that I absorbed growing up, seeing the world. Lived in Zimbabwe for a couple years when I was 7, 8, and 9. Traveled to parts of Europe and Central America, and You know, we did road trips around the United States and the countries, camping out in various places, and you know, I remember being inside the pyramids of Giza, you know, when I was 10, you know, and just, you
Wow.
know, just experiences like that change you. Whether you know it or not, subconsciously something is happening to you. And when I got to college, I was pre-med and music double major.
Pre-med and music double major, like pre-medical.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. It was it was it was it was dumb. Point is, I didn't do that. I didn't finish that. When I was a
But
junior,
that's the interesting part of the story. You try to bypass that, you know.
I was sure for like a decade, you know, middle school, you know, grade school, middle school, high school, that I was gonna be a doctor, and I was gonna,
Wow.
you know, I was gonna go back to Africa and work in clinics and work you know, work with my people, you know.
Yeah.
And then I went to the musical instrument museum as a junior in college when it had just been built, in North Phoenix, which is where I'm from. And I saw all these instruments from around the world, particularly bowed instruments, you know, derivatives, violin derivatives
Right.
from all over the world. And it just, you know, it just clicked to me. I was like, you know, I guess I could be a doctor, or I could, I had already been playing the violin for, you know, 14 years of my life, 15 years of my life. Like, why don't I take this road where I can continue to learn about this instrument and all the things that it is tentacled to for the rest of my life, and just be a student the rest of my life. And
Right.
that intrigued me more than anything else. And so, you know, I pivoted and started combining all these things that were interesting and compelling to me, right? Not just the music, but the activism, right? And the culture. And so that's why, you know, in that introduction where, you know, I talk about kind of the synergy of arts and culture and policy and advocacy and community development, all of these things. It's because, to me, folklore, you know, being a folklorist, um isn't just this like kind of academic uh engagement. It's an action, and it's a responsibility to showcase the humanity, period. Showcase humanity, right? And if we can somehow get our minds beyond, you know, being just entertained or being stuck in, you know, dumbed down into our phones, and we can actually engage in the music, we can dance, and we can eat the spicy food and sweat in front of other people, and you know, and just like live, then we can start to see each other.
Right.
And if we
Right.
can, and that's it, you know, there's got to be a global consciousness tied to this work for me.
Right.
um so that's kind of, that's, I guess, the short version of the story, believe it or
No,
not.
yeah. I mean, I got a lot from that. But so let me, at what point in this journey did you, like, so for me, it's when my wife walks into our bedroom at the time, which was my workstation,
Mhm.
and she stops and looks at me and goes, you know that old white guy that goes to the South to record old black guys? I said, Lomax? She said, yeah, that's what you do. And then she just walks out. And I was like, so then, so then I go on a journey to find out what he does, and this is how we get here.
Yeah.
What was your moment when you, from understanding the instrumentation and the musicianship to, hey, I'm a folklorist? What
Oh,
was that?
oh, oh man. Yeah, I mean, I haven't called myself a folklorist for very long. You know,
You have, based on everything you said, you do have the right to.
well, I appreciate that. You know, yeah, I think, honestly, I think maybe within the last 4 or 5 years, to be honest, because, um, I don't know. I guess I just didn't think I was worthy of that. You know, I still think, uh, I still think I'm a student, and I am a student. You know, and I will always be a student. Um, but I think I think, Joe and I started a program together about 12 years ago called Rhapsody. And this is a music and heritage kind of education program. Um, but it's really more than that. It's about developing people, and it's about using music as a way to help young folks find their identity, and settle into their identity and express themselves, and be in community. Um, you know, I think when I started doing that, and then starting CAC and trying to create spaces for art and culture to exist. I think somewhere, in there, maybe in the last 5, 10 years, I realized that my work, my folklore, uh, it was to help create spaces for this to exist, recognizing that it exists. I, you know, I'm just Ben, you
Right.
know,
Yeah.
but what I can do is leverage, the skills that I have, to create spaces, because that's something that's missing, is safe space to do this, you know, um, not even just to like jam or like hang out, but like even just performance spaces, art spaces, exhibition, gallery spaces, community kitchens. These things are getting priced out of cities like my
Right.
city, right? And so if you are pricing out arts and culture, how are you going to benefit from arts and culture? And not a lot of politicians really get that, because they're thinking that some of these macroscopic things are somehow not affected by arts and culture. When
Right.
my belief is that it undergirds everything. It
Everything.
is beneath everything.
Right. Society is built on culture. So you mentioned, I want to get the name right. Community Arts Create, right?
Yeah.
Could talk to us about it, and then after you break down that and describe it, give us the lifeline of Rhapsody as well.
Yeah, well, this will give you a little bit of an idea. I'm a pretty stubborn person that doesn't really like authority. So I told you I reject a lot of things. I was I was working for a nonprofit, and no shade on that nonprofit, but I was working, when I initially got involved. It was because I was going to teach violin, but I was also going. There was also like a community program element to it. And after being there for about a year and realizing that the investment into community programs up above like violin lessons or dance classes or things like that wasn't going to happen at this space, I decided, that I could. This was a gap that I could fill. And so I started CAC with the idea that there are plenty of organizations and businesses and schools out there that are teaching people how to play music, that are teaching people how to paint, that are teaching people how to dance. Where are the spaces that are allowing people to do that organically with other people? Um, and and so that's kind of the impetus for community arts create, right? That community arts create things. And so I started this, and we did mural projects, we did cooking classes, we had a summer, arts arts in the alley, uh, festival called Bohemian Backstreets. We had we had all sorts of stuff, and then Joe and I were playing in a band at the time, and we weren't really that excited by the band per se, and wanted to get deeper into this music that kind of fueled us. This roots music, this blues and this folk, and these kind of story based musics. And so we started going to, Centrum Acoustic Blues Festival, and I mean, I remember it. I remember it like yesterday. We were two young, dirty, like scroungy, scrubby, you know, folks that were like completely welcomed into this community. and I remember Phil Wiggins and Steve James as being two of these people that just kind of welcomed us in with open arms immediately. And and Joe and I both, Joe was teaching music classes down in Portland, and I was teaching these classes to supplement my income at Washington Middle School, this historic middle school in Seattle that fed programs like Garfield High School and Roosevelt High School, that sent kids to the Ellington Jazz Festival
Oh
in New York
wow.
and won. So it was like a very rich musical program. And I was the director of this after school folk fiddle program. And so I said, hey, Joe, why don't you come up to Seattle? We can teach this program together. And there's something about this Centrum Acoustic Blues Festival and fiddle tunes. There's something here that like we could like localize a little bit more. And I'll get into that later, because I think that's an important thing. Is like there's all these solutions out there in the world if you have money and
Right.
time and privilege
Right.
and access. And so, part of creating spaces is recognizing that the accessibility is a major hurdle. And so if you can localize that and direct it towards a place where people have access to that, that's really important. So we started Rhapsody with this idea that hey, we are musicians. We are connected to culture bearers, and we're geeks in our own right of this stuff, and maybe we can maybe young kids would be into that. Like when I told you that my mom asked me if I wanted to go to the Mark O'Connor fiddle camp, like maybe I would have been more engaged in something like that if it came to me, right?
Right.
And helped pique my interest in what that is a little bit more, so that instead of going to the Paul Westphal Phoenix Suns basketball camp, which I did go to,
Really?
because I also thought I was going to be a basketball star, like we all do,
Yeah, we did. Yeah.
you know.
My reality was at 15, and I realized I wasn't going to be a 6'9" point guard.
Yeah, yeah. When I was hanging out at 5'8" and not really going anywhere else, I was like,
So wait, talk to us about this localization, because it's ironic you say that. Most of us that do or participate in any kind of work like this, it always starts unrealistic. I have to save the world, and we're thinking of these big grandiose things.
Mhm.
What was kind of the spark that allowed you that practicality? Let's start at home. Ultimately,
I mean, I think that was it. I mean, I think I had found myself in this very unique place in South Seattle. At the time, 98118, where I had moved, where this nonprofit was. I had moved to Seattle. Quick backstory: I'd moved to Seattle out of college, moved to some random place. I didn't know where I was. It was all right, and then I got this job in South Seattle. I got off the bus and I was like, "Holy!" There's people that look like me.
uh-huh.
People are saying good morning, hello, how are you? Not this like the rest of Seattle where they just kind of walk right by you, earphones in your. There was something there.
Right.
And I think that it just struck me, right, that I still have these save the world visions in my head, but the what has changed for me is this process, right? The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is not going to save the world. You
Right.
know what I mean? And I just use them as
As an example, yeah.
an example of, because everybody knows their name, right? And they got all the money and all the things. We won't get into the politics of Bill and Melinda Gates today, but to me, if you could get small, intimate experiences for people, create small, intimate experiences for people, locally based, people can walk to, people can remember faces and names, people can develop and mature relationships. People feel seen,
Right.
right? You're not, it's not the Folklife Festival, which as much as I love my festival, it's like 200,000 people. It's like 100,
Right. Right.
Well, you're not seen, you're not going to be seen that way, right? As much as you're going to be seen in some sort of like monthly, backyard community, like little festival, right? Where maybe 50, 100 people come and hang out, listen to music and get, talk to each other. And so, to me, that became the ingredient that was necessary for this to work. Because again, it's the difference between the art and entertainment.
Right.
If it's just about the entertainment, then go ahead, man. Lollapalooza it up. Create that vibe. But if you want to create lasting connections, I'll tell you this right now. Like, we started Rhapsody, I want to say 2014.
Okay.
And so, we were working with middle school kids, 6th, 7th, 8th graders. I just went to the Black and Tan Hall last week to work my shift, and who was sitting in the booth was this young student that I had when she was in 6th grade.
Oh wow.
Now she's 21, coming and hanging out. We have young people that, were tiny little things. Now they could be basketball players. And also they still come to the jam sessions at 22, 23. They still come, one of them is making guitars.
Oh wow.
Got into Lutherie. One of them is a violin player, and through Rhapsody really started to get in touch with their Yiddish roots and started to like explore more Jewish, klezmer Yiddish songs and traditions. So like, that's important to me, right? Because it's
Absolutely.
not like gifting people some songs. It's like it's gifting people context and a relationship with which to explore that authentically and sincerely, and with a type of humility, right?
Right.
So I think that's why it's important. And I'll just say as an anecdote, New York Times came out with an article last year or earlier this year that said that there was about a 40% closure of festivals worldwide. And one of the reasons that they prescribed to that, or ascribed to that, is that these young people right now, they aren't interested in sex, drugs, and rock and roll. They're interested in relationships. They don't need to like go to a festival, take a bunch of drugs and drink and like dance, sex, and then like listen to some music. Now that's not what they're interested in. They're interested in like actually absorbing what's in front of them, having meaningful conversations, and in an environment that they feel safe, safe in.
Full engagement.
Right.
But so I have to ask you this, and I should have took a snapshot of this to pull it up, because I like the fact that you call your engagement the soapbox.
Yeah.
Because I'm seeing this, but I would like for you to speak to that for the audience.
If it's not known to y'all who are watching this, I have a lot to say. And ever since I was a kid, my teachers were always telling me to shut up. But I don't know. I think that I don't know, Lamont, like we're at a very crucial moment, and we've been at it. I have seen this coming for years, right? Where we just keep getting tricked and trapped.
Right.
And I really appreciate these conversations that people are having, or maybe I shouldn't say appreciate. I guess I do appreciate it, but I should say I understand these conversations that people are having, where they're saying that what we need are celebrations of joy for this advocacy.
Right.
And I agree. We should be celebrating, and we should be joyful, and we should be all of that. And we need to be fierce and resolute and radical and and for certain things, unbendable. I mean, obviously, life is a giant compromise, but there are certain
Right.
things that are unbendable. And so when I say my soapbox, I'm saying like this is me looking you in the eye or anybody in the eye and telling you that this is what I believe, and this is how I believe it. And it's not rooted in othering anybody. It's just stating things that I think are universal tenets of a social contract, right? That like everybody deserves to be seen and heard and appreciated. Everybody deserves life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. Everybody deserves water and shelter and healthcare. And 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 for generations and millennia, artists have been the ones ringing that bell forever.
Yeah.
They've been telling us and reminding us of our history, of our story, of where we come from, where we, who we are. And they've been trying to say, hey, look at this.
Right.
Look at
Right.
what we did 10 years
Mm.
ago. Are we going to repeat that, or are we going to do something different? Let me describe to you this beautiful world. Let me paint this picture of this beautiful place. Let me let me let me let me show you my art and my design and all the things that matter to me. And don't things like that matter to you? Don't you want to see that? And I feel like I feel like it's like Looney Tunes, where I'm just carrying a big old stick and trying to knock people over the head with
But
this.
yeah, so I'm happy you said that because it makes me want to ask this question that I've seemed to be speaking about the last couple of weeks. And ironically, yesterday I was taking the youngsters to their rehearsal and music lesson and all this stuff. And one of the teachers there is a buddy of mine, and we were talking about a situation here uh, uh, about rent. So Bowling Green, Kentucky, is the wild, wild west of rent. Let's just put it out there. And we were having this conversation, and then he looks at me. He goes, "Is this a political conversation we're having?" And I was like, "I imagine it is." He said, "Because this is supposed to be a safe space. Like we're supposed to here. We're not supposed to talk about politics, right?" And I was like, "Well, music is politics. I guess whatever. We had a little conversation. And on the way home, it was kind of funny because I've been having this conversation about the separation of church and state, if you will,
Mhm.
when it comes to music. And I think you're the perfect person to ask this to because you've made a very clear definition between entertainment and art. And I think that's where it gets murky because for entertainment purposes, you don't want to speak about politics because that's going to stop your bag,
Mhm.
right? So I don't want to give too much context. I just want to hear what you have to say about politics, music, and church and state.
It's God, it almost gets me a little emotional right now because um it's a real shame. It's a real shame that these famous musicians and actors and entertainers and celebrities with all the money and all the things that they have are unwilling to take a stand for something because of what it's going to do to their image or to their job prospects, as if Hollywood is the only business in town to do what they want to do. You know what I mean?
Mhm, mhm,
So,
mhm.
like, if acting is your thing, there's plenty of ways to do it. You know what I mean? And
Right.
I'm pretty sure you made enough money that you could probably act in a community theater for the rest of your life and still be living large. It's a shame to me that we've come to this place where the people that we think are on the side of justice are are they might be against it, but they're not going to say anything about it, and therefore they're complicit in it. And that's where we
Right.
are right now. And when I say like we've been getting to this place over the last 10, 20 years, I mean we're getting worse and worse and worse and worse and worse, right? Such that entertainment and all the
Right.
money that it represents, right? Um, we just found out, right, that Spotify's CEO is like an investor in some sort of like AI soldiering war machine, something or other. And
Right.
yet,
Right.
all the musicians, not all the musicians, but plenty of musicians are still going to use Spotify as their source. Never mind the years of drama around them not getting paid equitably. Like,
Right.
forget that. And so I think that we're at a really crucial moment where we have to really rethink the system that we're a part of. And when we need to design a new system, and because right now, we are being forced to look this way. And I say forced because, like, we might want to look this way, but it's just so much easier to look this way.
Right. Right. Right.
Yeah. It's just so much easier. And so there's like, I feel like most people have this conscience on their shoulder, but the conditions
Right.
to listen to that conscience require some sort of like release of some element of privilege, and access and standard of living that they are unwilling to get rid of. And
Right.
it's a shame.
Well, with that being said, I have to ask because uh, well, it's kind of weird. It's not weird, right? Because for me personally, I have to remind myself sometimes some of these folk, and when I say folk, to be specific, some of the ancestors, blues ancestors, string or black traditional music ancestors that I look to, even David Ruffins and Stevie Wonder, cats like this. Um, Everyone wasn't looking to be a tradition bearer. Some people were really looking to make money. Then you have
Make the money, yeah. The
right,
job.
you know, oh yes, some folk. This was a means to an end because they didn't have. They figured out a way.
Mhm.
So I have to. But for those of us that kind of stepped into this idea of tradition bearing and take that serious, kind of sidestepping from our initial segment on this and moving to this. Do you take yourself as a living archiving repository? And then I would ask you, what is a repository or archive to you? How would you define that?
Uh,
Did I go too far to the left without preparation? Sorry.
no, 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 no. I just want to figure out how to answer this. I I think I think part of me wants to say that I am not a culture bearer.
Okay.
Like, again, it's like that thing that I say, where I don't think that I'm a folklorist because I don't think I've deserved it yet. At the same time, I think if I'm talking about, I've said this before. I think we're all culture bearers. We all have an experience. We all have something that is unique to us. That is a lesson learned. That is a trick. Is a song. Is a story. Is a something that we can impart. Even my 5-year-old son is a culture bearer. You know what I mean? Like,
Yes.
he's able to see things and put words to things in ways that are constantly teaching me and pushing me. So in that sense, I think we all serve as some sort of archive. We all serve as some sort of repository of knowledge and stories and lessons and all that sort of thing. Um, to the point that you were saying, right, where we'll go back to like a Charlie Patton. Like, did he think he was a culture bearer? Maybe. I mean, he certainly like was passing on his wisdom to other artists, um and also but also he was probably recording those songs because he was getting paid.
Right.
um it's a little harder to define that at that moment because the recording industry wasn't the recording industry that it is today. It was off the heels of a lifetime of playing these musics, maybe for dances and maybe for parties, but in this kind of very hyper community, cultural, local kind of space, where you were still part of the entertainment, but that entertainment was actually like sustenance. It was like food. It was like food for the community to absorb and thrive off of. Archives now, we started an archive a couple years ago, and we actually hired our first archivist
Oh, wow.
earlier this year for Northwest Folklife.
Nice.
We've got we've got reel-to-reel tapes, beta tapes, cassettes, photos, all sorts of things going back to 1972 when
Oh, wow.
when the festival started, and a lot of this stuff hasn't been seen because it hasn't been digitized yet. So we wanted to make sure that we did this with care and we're able to unveil these stories and these archives. So we're working on that. And there's some things that need to be considered, and this isn't new. This isn't new. What I'm about to say isn't like a new theory or a new idea, but it would be easier for us to get the money, digitize all the stuff that we have, and put it up on the internet for people to check out. Very much in the Lomax
Right.
kind of way, like whoever wants to see it, blah blah, see it. But I think that there's also an element of this that is less communal and very I don't want to say hyper individual, but let's say public and private. I'll use those words instead.
Okay.
Where there are recordings, of folks that might be very that like a cultural community might want to archive and treasure and have available this story for the cultural community,
Right.
but not for the public.
Right.
And so I think when it comes to archives, there's it's not that complicated or problematic, although we make it because we feel like we should have access to everything. And that again, this cultural music or whatever is a commodity and not something a little bit more sacred.
Right.
Well, I think the dance that we have to play is just making sure that we do our due diligence to make sure that when we are recording something or we are digitizing something, who actually owns that story and who has rights to that story, and do we have permission as Northwest Folklife as an organization, whether or not we gathered it, whether or not we paid to have it digitized, that doesn't matter. What
Right.
matters is, do we have your permission to show it? Do we have
Right.
permission? It's like when cameras came out, right? And people thought that their souls were being captured.
Right.
Do we have the right to present that? Do we have the permission to present that? And if we do, wonderful. And we will make sure that we as best as we can describe and present what we have with as much respect and care and decency as we can. Otherwise, here, it's yours. It's not for us. You
Right.
have it. You take
Right.
it. And I think that's how we're thinking about archiving. At least that's how I think about archiving.
Well, so because that's another ongoing conversation that I've been having with quite a few people, particularly after reading this piece about Octavia Butler's archive and how it was looked at by the archivists, I guess you could say the traditional white archivists juxtapose a black woman into Octavia Butler's work and finding out that, well, she didn't do it incorrectly. She had her own methodology and her own strategy of how an archive should look and function. So with that being said,
why do we do it?
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, there's so many questions. Why do we do it? Is there this idea of a colonial language and approach to archives that make it difficult for those of us that,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think there's a couple things. I mean, I think one, it comes down to access, motive, you know, uh, you know, um, I think my problem with ethnomusicology is that
mhm,
it is the motivation is skewed, right? The motivation of ethnomusicology, and it's changing in some campuses, but the motivation is to look at something through a looking glass and make observations and maybe opinions on it, and not actually participate and learn it.
right.
I'm going to write about it, I'm going to describe it in this colonial language, but I'm not going to actually feel it or touch it or you know
Yeah, I do know.
absorb it. So I think the reason that we do it is a couple reasons. Again, assuming we have the permission and assuming we are given the rights to release that stuff. Um, Particularly in this moment, and I mean this generation, I guess. One, um, to represent our artists. Many of our artists, especially modern interviews and stuff that we're doing right now, like you mentioned earlier, they do this as a job. This is their job, right? And so we are a 54-year-old organization. People are coming to our website. They're checking stuff out. If we can leverage our name and our status and our position to help promote, local artists and their artistry, fantastic.
Right.
So we want people to be like, hey, check out our archive. Oh, you see this Brazilian dancer? You want to hire her to do some stuff? Here's her information, and here's this beautiful video that you can see all the stuff that she provides and does. Um, so one is just like a kind of like a kind of like a community resource for gigs, gigs for
Right.
you or gig salad or something like that, whatever the thing is. Second, is an educational resource. Certainly as an educational resource. You wanna either know what the collection is of arts that exist and culture that exists in the Pacific Northwest. Come check out our archive. You want to uh, research Brazilian music and art and dance. We have everything categorized in tags that you can look up stuff based off of region or culture or community or whatever. Um, and I think third uh, is is just arguably I think the most important, which is to present humanity,
Hmm.
right? Is to say here is what the world has to offer. This is what folk life is about. This is
Right.
what people are about. This is what folk is about, lowercase f. You know, folk is people doing things, and we do it all the time. We come up with creative solutions for things all the time. We make things all the time, randomly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even when we're like making dinner, and we're feeling fancy, and we're like, I'm gonna plate this chicken like this, and then I'm gonna
Right.
lay this broccoli over this chicken. Like all the different ways. This is how my mind works, right? It's like it's not just about the things that we are so accustomed to seeing when it comes to like our individual idiosyncrasies or whatever, because that's folk is
Right.
just one big old complicated complex idiosyncrasy thing, right?
Right. Yes.
And so I want people to be able to see that, and going back to the kind of like educational element too, right? Like there, and what I was telling you about the derivatives of violins, like I want people to see the relationship,
Right.
right, between you know South America and, I don't know, West Africa. I want people to see that capoeira actually has roots in Angola. And if
Hmm.
we have Angolan performers or something, then maybe people can see the relationship in that music and that sound and that style to how it translated itself into Brazilian cultural practice,
Right.
right? I want people
Right.
to see those lineages. I want people to understand. I remember getting into an argument with some dude on Facebook of all places. You know, back when I was young and had the time for that shit,
Right.
about the origins of the banjo. You know,
Hmm.
the banjo player, and he's like, he's like poppycock. You know, banjo comes from Ireland. I'm like, I don't even know. I don't even know what book you read that said that.
Right.
There's a
As
lot
far
of
as I'm concerned, they were introduced to the banjo on the Americas.
yeah, I don't even think so. I think archives also serve just especially if built correctly, if built in a way that is accessible,
Right.
easy to use. I think culturalequity.org, great resource, not easy to navigate. So I'm how do we make it accessible? How do we make it easy? How do we make it fun? How do we make it relevant? Um, and when you talk about politics and entertainment and church, food is politics.
Yes, sir.
If you're disappearing migrant workers across the nation, you're not thinking about all the food that they produce and how that affects this country and the people and everybody that lives here.
Yeah.
Everything is political. And this idea that is going around where people are talking about, like, well, it's unfortunate that we can have different political ideologies and not be human to each other. I don't.
I don't buy that either.
If your politics strips me of my humanity and my right to live, then we're gonna have a problem.
Right.
you know.
Right. No, for real. Yeah.
And if you can't see that, then we have a problem. And so that's where I see this is where arts and culture and these archives and all these things have a place, because they help us if you allow them to, if you resource them, if you invest in them, if you create spaces for them, they allow us to see our common humanity. And as obvious as that might sound, um, and easy as it might sound, it's surprising to me how people don't want to see humanity.
Right. No, it is. So I have to ask you this because you opened the door on so many levels. You know, Black futurism and ancestral knowledge, because everything you just spoke of kind of lives in that space, and you can open it up globally if you wish. My particular focus is Black Southern in the Americas, but you can open it up globally for the conversation.
Well, I think a lot of my work comes out of like Black radical liberation theory.
Yeah, I hear a lot of Leroy Jones in you. Yes.
Like, there's some Leroy Jones, some Cedric Robinson,
Yeah.
um, you know, that especially for oppressed communities, um, there is an example to be shown of the resiliency, but also the open table of that advocacy. It's not a closed door advocacy. It's never been, you know, Black Lives Matter has never been um, uh, expressly for Black people. It's about looking at what is happening in the Black community and being able to understand that from a global consciousness and how these things intersect and relate with each other. The intersectionality is super important to me. And so, when I think of liberation, um, I think of it in this Black radical kind of context, and what does it mean to be bold, and fierce and resilient, um, and going back to kind of what I was talking about before, the celebration of joy is that element, right? That's like, come into my kitchen, you know, I'm fighting for my rights, eyes on the prize here, and these steps need to be taken, but it is for a global consciousness. It is for a global liberation, um, and uh, and you know, in order for people to kind of understand that, they have to they have to do some homework,
Yeah.
and nobody wants to do any homework. Nobody wants to read a book, and okay, so if you don't want to read a book, how do we, or do your own homework. How do we bring this information to you? You know, and it goes back to these localized small community events. You know, like
Hmm.
I started Community Arts Create in Rhapsody, but then I also co-founded a space called the Hillman City Collaboratory, and the Collaboratory was this intersection of there was a church, there was a gallery and performing arts space, there was a incubator for you know folks working in social justice issues that needed office space. Like, how do we put all these things together so that we understand the intersections between music and art, and culture, and faith, and
Right.
and community organizing, and all of these things. We had a drop-in center for homeless folks, or
Wow.
for unhoused folks. um, and so, I'm just finishing up grad school right now. I'm getting an MBA in arts innovation.
Oh, nice.
And
Congratulations.
thank you. Looking at creative industries, creative economy, creative ecosystems from a business perspective. And one of my group capstone project was effectively um, taking these microcosmic elements of these kind of hyper local festival arts driven experiences and replicating that model the world over. So how do
Mhm.
you help instigate, and then once you replicate that model, how do you connect these sites? How do you connect these, various collaboratories or community arts creates around the world? And a lot of my research, that these places exist, but they don't talk to each other. They don't know about each other. So
Right.
how do you create how do we get this space, Nafasi Art Space in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, to connect with the Black and Tan Hall in Seattle? In what ways can we create networks of people so that we recognize and understand that the how we win this battle is through ecosystem, collective, shared work.
I dig it, man. So with that being said, because I'm gonna have to, I can ask you questions all day, man. I
Yeah,
love
we can do
rocking
this
with
all day.
you.
Yeah, I'm looking at the clock like, what's it?
But so these are my usually last two questions. One of them you kind of answered, but we'll get to that next. What advice would you give to emerging Black artists, cultural workers, and everyone in our space for navigating this idea of tradition, identity, advocacy, activism, or just plain old, you know what?
Yeah.
No one in my family is taking the time to do this. Let me just become the repository for the Jenkins.
Um, that's a really important question for me because, and I'll try and keep this short too, but um, I'm mixed. I'm half black, half white. My father was Tanzanian, born in Lesotho. Mom is a white woman from Phoenix, Arizona. I never met my dad. It's a complicated, long story. Uh, we won't get into it. But what that did was it raised me in a very white context, in a very white environment, as a black man in the United States who is African. Like, so much of my
Right.
young experience as a kid was in Africa and from an African context, which doesn't vibe, or it certainly didn't very well in the '90s and early aughts with the black community in the United States. And there still is a certain, I don't want to say tension, but
There's different ideologies. There's conflicting ideologies. Absolutely.
yeah. And so I think that it was hard for me to understand what my blackness was
Hmm.
growing up, which was part of the reason why Black Boys was such a powerful experience for me. I was the only straight um, member of this group of people, and so Black Boys really was looking at, was challenging the idea of Black masculinity. But from my context, it was challenging, um, not just that, but just the monolithic uh, assignment that Black men are given, not considering
Right.
the fact that there are so many obviously, right? Context to which we all exist and live. And so my advice to any young Black person that wants to get involved in this type of work is to be okay to be you. And that sounds so cliche and vague, but my power comes from knowing that I am who I am, and it has created who I am. And nobody is going to do what I do because I am the only person that has my experience. Now,
Bingo.
right? I'm the only person that has my experience, and my responsibility, particularly to my Black community, to my brothers and sisters that look like me, is to make sure that is to not make sure, but to ensure that I present myself as me, so that they can present themselves like them, so that we can present the beauty that is Blackness as a poly whatever the
Right.
opposite of
Multifaceted. Right.
you know. And I think that's really really important, because you're gonna have my buddy Dom, who left this country and lives in Portugal right now, um who loves gaming and loves comic books and loves computers and all that kind of thing, and that's him, and he does that so well and so beautifully and so whatever. um and I think it's just really important that we all see each other for each other and not try and place a certain type of qualification on what Blackness is. i think
Right.
that's I think that's so important to the future of our world, particularly as Black folks.
Right. And yeah, I don't, just to go on record, I don't think that statement, your opening statement, is cliche or tongue in cheek, because ultimately, at the end of the day, a lot of our work is based on or in identity,
Mhm.
right? And if you're not comfortable in your skin, you're going in places that, you know, I thought, well, I'm Black, I can go here. And then you go there and it's like, yeah, you are Black, we're Black, but you're not from here.
Yeah.
So there's just so many different
Yeah.
layers. So yeah,
Yeah.
I agree. I agree. So okay, last question is AB. What's next for Ben Hunter, and where could the good folk find you?
Well, B is hard because I am the worst at self promotion. Like, I can't tell you how many people, how many times I play a show and people are like, how do I, can I, how do I follow you? Can I buy something from you? And I'm like, I don't know. And no, like, I rarely carry CDs on this, but I need to fix that. What's next for me? Um, I'm a father of a 5-year-old. I love my job at Folklife, although it is hard. It is definitely difficult, you know, to work in creative industries, especially for folk festivals. Like, it's difficult. There's not a lot of money in the work,
Yeah.
and at least for the next 3 years, getting federal dollars and other type of government monies is gonna be difficult, and that's gonna affect how we produce our festival.
Right.
But I my partner and I bought 6.5 acres of land last August.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, on an island just off of Seattle, Vashon Island, and so I'm hoping to build up this property, um, and try and turn it. Part of my work for my grad school project, my individual project, was researching like creative districts, artist residency spaces, arts retreat spaces, and try and create some sort of kind of like, again, we're talking about space. Trying to create a space where artists can come, decompress, create, make art, um, that's away from a city, and that's peaceful and quiet and tranquil. But also, again, thinking of intersectional work, how do we bring audiences onto the property to experience their art in some sort of thoughtful, meaningful way? How do we pair that with a farm where we're growing food. How do we connect the dots between food justice and social justice and community development and
Right.
arts and culture and all these things, in a space that can showcase that, and then people can leave and take that out into the world. So that's kind of what I'm working on right now. I'm going to leave this interview and go finish working on a compost toilet that I'm building.
You're doing real work. I dig it. I dig it, man. This was wonderful. You know what I mean? And it's very
Likewise.
so there's just like black. I remember having this conversation with the great Brandy Wilder Pace, right? That black folk or the blues is not monolithic, and it's not just about being downtrodden. And
Yeah.
you give us the you gave us so many different examples of the multitude of not just blackness, but the work that is being done in these spaces. So it's like not just for one specific section, but for the whole. Good stuff, man. We applaud you. I got to get this applaud button working.
I appreciate you, and that goes back to you. It going to like the what was the American Folklore Society conference last year, 2 years ago, and being able to see you and Phil and Junius and people that I respect and look up to in these spaces, helping change that narrative and helping push the ball forward, is it's paramount, and I appreciate you and I see you. So thank you for having me on. It's truly an honor.
Likewise, and just a quick moment of silence for brother Elder Phil Wiggins, because that was the last time I saw Mr. Wiggins. Was the last time I saw you.
Yeah, I miss him every day.
Yeah.
Every day.
Good brother. Good folks. I'll tell you right now where to find Ben. And it's BenjaminHunterMusic.com. Matter of fact,
That's it.
I'm going to drop this in real quick and let this go across the bottom of the screen prior to us getting out of here. This is where you can, and not only find him, you can contact him.
Yeah, you get a hold of me.
All right.
And I'm going to update this website soon.
Somebody got to do it,
That'd be me. I know. I keep waiting for some magical assistant to fall out of the air, but that ain't happening yet.
All right, good folks, you know what to do. Make sure y'all check out the new AfricanAmericanFolklorist.com website, or I shouldn't say new, but updated, what gives you all how what we're working with and how we're trying to build community. I take a pause when I say community. I'm not a fan of the word, not because there's a problem. It's very ambiguous, because everything is a community, and so I get a little confused. But either way, y'all know what to do. You know what time it is. You know where to find us, and don't let us have to find you.
Peace, y'all.